This happened to me 3 years ago during the late autumn of 2021. I've never told anyone the full story. Not the police, not my parents, and certainly not my wife, Sarah. If she knew the full extent of what I found out there in those woods, she would never sleep again. She'd look at every window in our home, every shadow stretching across the hardwood floor, and she would lose her mind. I keep it locked away inside my own head. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the glass pane in our bedroom at night, it all comes rushing back, cold and sharp as a razor blade. We had just rented a small, run-down colonial-style house in rural Connecticut. It wasn't our dream home, but the rent was affordable. We were young, broke, and desperate for a place to call our own, even if it was a fixer-upper. The woods behind the house were dense and ancient, a tangled mess of oak and pine that seemed to swallow the light. Sarah loved the idea of living surrounded by nature, but I felt an unease every time I looked at them. One crisp October afternoon, I decided to explore. I wanted to prove to myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. The air grew colder the deeper I went, and the silence was profound, broken only by the crunch of my boots on dead leaves. I froze, straining my ears. It stopped. I took a tentative step forward, and it started again, closer this time. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted to turn back, but a morbid curiosity held me in place. I pushed aside a thick curtain of branches and saw it. A clearing, bathed in an unnatural, sickly green light. In the center of the clearing, something was moving. A shape, indistinct and hunched, was dragging itself across the damp earth. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too wrong. A low, guttural sound emanated from it, a sound that vibrated in my bones. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. I didn't see its face, but I felt its awareness of me. I turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I burst out of the woods and back into the fading light of our yard. I never went back into those woods. I never told Sarah. I just locked it away. But sometimes, when the wind rattles the glass pane in our bedroom at night, it all comes rushing back, cold and sharp as a razor blade. This happened to me 3 months ago. I've never told anyone the full story. I'm writing this now because I haven't slept more than 2 consecutive hours since it happened. To understand why this hit me so hard, you have to understand the house. I bought it in late spring. It's a modest, split-level home built in the mid-70s, tucked away at the very end of a gravel dead-end road in rural Pennsylvania. The back of the property line is completely swallowed by state park woodland, thick, choking acres of hemlock, mountain laurel, and rotting white oak. I got it for a steal. The estate sale listing had been sitting active for nearly 18 months, which should have been my first warning. The real estate agent, a remarkably tired woman named Brenda, assured me it was just because of the market and a few minor cosmetic issues. The main cosmetic issue was the basement. It was entirely unfinished. The stairs leading down were open-backed, rough-hewn pine that creaked like dry bones under any amount of weight. The walls were stacked cinder block, covered in a flaky, white efflorescence that looked like frost but felt like chalky dust. It always smelled of wet lime, vinegar, and that distinct, heavy dampness that clings to the back of your throat. For the first few weeks, life was blissfully boring. I spent my days working from home at my desk in the spare bedroom, and my evenings walking Buster. Buster is my 3-year-old golden retriever mix. But about a month into living there, Buster's behavior began to shift. It started on our evening walks along the tree line. Normally, he'd sprint ahead, chasing squirrels or sniffing the base of the wild ferns. But gradually, he stopped venturing into the tree line altogether. He would stand at the very edge of the manicured lawn, his front paws glued to the grass, staring into the dark geometry of the trunks. His tail would drop. "Come on, buddy," I'd call, tugging his leash. Nothing out there but deer. He would let out this low, vibrating growl. It wasn't the play growl he used when we wrestled. It was a dry, rattling sound from the back of his throat that made the hair on my own arm stand up. Then there was the basement door. It was located in the kitchen, right next to the pantry. It was a heavy wooden door that didn't quite fit its frame, meaning you had to really shove it to get the latch to click. I kept it shut because of the draft. But every other morning, I'd come downstairs to find it resting open by about 2 inches. Just a black vertical sliver of shadow. I blamed the house settling. I blamed the warped wood. I bought a brass hook-and-eye latch and installed it at the top of the door out of habit. That seemed to fix it, though occasionally in the dead of night, I'd hear a dull, rhythmic asterisk thunk. Thunk. Thunk asterisk from the kitchen, like something heavy was gently leaning its shoulder against the wood, testing the lock. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Buster found the box. The weather was miserable, one of those humid, oppressive autumn days where the air feels like wet wool. I had let Buster out into the fenced portion of the backyard while I finished a conference call. Through the window, I watched him pacing the back fence line. Suddenly, he began to dig. Now Buster isn't a digger. He hates getting his paws dirty. But he was tearing into the earth beneath a massive, half-dead hemlock tree with a frantic, desperate energy. Mud was flying in dark arcs behind his hind legs. "Buster, no, stop it." I yelled, sliding open the back door and jogging out into the humid air. He didn't stop. He was whining, a high-pitched, whistling sound that sounded like air escaping a balloon. By the time I reached him, he was chin-deep in a trench he'd excavated between 2 thick, gnarled roots. "What is wrong with you?" I grabbed his collar, pulling him back. His snout was caked in black, loamy dirt, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He didn't lock eyes with me. He kept staring down into the hole, his chest heaving. I looked down. Resting in the wet clay, wedged tightly between the roots, was a corner of gray metal. At first I thought it was an old car part or maybe a buried pipe. But as I cleared away the loose soil with the toe of my boot, the rectangular shape became clear. It was a metal cash box, about the size of a shoebox. It was heavy, painted a dark, military olive green, and sealed with a rusted brass master padlock. This happened to me about 3 months ago. I've never told anyone the full story, not even Sarah, my wife. She thinks it was just a rough patch, a weird few weeks where I was stressed about work and, well, about our daughter, Emily. She's 8, bright as a button, but lately she'd been quiet. Too quiet. It started with the storm. Not a hurricane, not even a particularly bad one, just a fierce, local downpour that snapped a few branches off the old oak at the back of our yard. We live in a pretty standard suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone's lawns are manicured, and the biggest excitement is the annual neighborhood barbecue. We'd owned the house for 5 years, and that oak had always been a fixture, a bit imposing, but mostly just there. The morning after the sun was out, a little too bright, glinting off the scattered leaves and debris. Sarah wanted me to get it cleaned up before the weekend, and I agreed. I'm not exactly Mr. fix it, but clearing branches is within my skill set. I grabbed the loppers and a rake and headed out the back door. The air was still thick with the smell of damp earth and pine needles, a comforting scent usually. That's when I saw it. Not the broken branches, but the gap, where the base of the oak had been right up against the property line fence. There was a depression in the soil, deeper and more unnatural than I'd ever noticed before. It looked like the tree had been ripped out of the ground, roots and all, leaving a clean, almost perfectly circular hole. And nestled within that hole, half buried, was something metal. My first thought was some kind of old septic tank lid, or maybe a forgotten well cap. Curiosity, a trait Sarah often says will be the death of me, got the better of me. I dropped the rake and knelt down. The metal was cold, even in the morning sun, rough with rust. It was a hatch, all right. A heavy, rectangular iron hatch, with a thick, recessed handle. It was surprisingly clean underneath where the dirt had been disturbed by the storm. It looked deliberate. I tugged at the handle. It was stiff, caked with dried mud, but it moved. With a groan that sounded like a rusty hinge protesting its very existence, the hatch lifted. A blast of cool, stagnant air hit my face, smelling of dust, mildew, and something else, something faint and vaguely sweet like old flowers. I peered down. It was dark, too dark to see anything clearly. I fumbled for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a short, rough-hewn ladder descending into blackness. Below, maybe 10 feet down, I could make out the edge of a small room. It looked like a bunker. Now this is where things start to get weird, and I'm trying to keep a clear head as I type this, even now. A bunker. Beneath our perfectly normal, manicured suburban lawn. It felt like something out of a conspiracy theory podcast. My heart was thumping, a mix of excitement and a prickle of unease. I called Sarah. "Honey, you're not going to believe this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What is it?" "Mark, did you find a squirrel's nest?" she asked, her voice already tinged with that familiar, gentle exasperation. "No, there's a hatch. In the ground. Behind the oak tree. I think it's a bunker." There was a pause, then a bunker. "Mark, are you sure? Maybe it's just an old cistern or something. Don't go messing with it." "It's definitely a hatch, Sarah. It leads somewhere." She sighed. "All right, just be careful, and don't spend all morning out there. We have that thing at your parents' tonight." I put the phone down and carefully descended the ladder. Each rung creaked under my weight, and the air grew cooler, heavier. My flashlight beam danced across damp concrete walls, slick with condensation. It wasn't a large space, maybe 8 by 10 feet. In the center of the floor, there was a small wooden table, and on the table a single thick spiral-bound calendar. I picked it up. The paper was brittle, yellowed with age. It was a generic wall calendar, the kind you get for free at the bank, but this one was different. It was marked, extensively. Every single day from the previous year was marked with a small, neatly drawn circle, and then starting from January of this year, the circles changed. They became excess, and the excess were ticked. My blood ran cold. I flipped through the pages. Every day from January 1st of this year, every single day was marked with a ticked X. And on the current month, October, the current day, the 14th, was marked with a fresh, bold X. It was like someone was counting down or counting up. Then I noticed the shelves. Bolted to the walls were rows of metal shelves crammed with canned goods. Familiar brands mostly. Baked beans, corn, peaches. All dated, but none of them seemed *2* old. There were also stacks of children's clothes. Little t-shirts, tiny jeans, jumpers with cartoon characters. All folded neatly, impossibly clean despite the musty air. They were all in the size Emily wore, or rather the size she *was wearing. And the sizes just below, too. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't a forgotten bomb shelter. This was something else, something deeply unsettling. I ran my hand over the rough concrete wall. It felt cold, clammy. I could hear my own breathing amplified in the small space. I scrambled back up the ladder, my hands slick with sweat. I slammed the hatch shut, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the yard. I felt a desperate urge to just forget I'd seen it, to just cover it up, pretend it was a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination. That night at my parents' house, I was a wreck. Sarah kept giving me worried glances. "Are you feeling all right, Mark? You're a bit pale." "Just tired," I mumbled, pushing peas around my plate. "You've been tired a lot lately," my mother said, her voice laced with that typical motherly concern that always made me feel like a child. "Is everything okay at work?" "Fine, Mom, just busy." Later, after Emily was tucked into bed, Sarah came to me in the living room. She sat on the edge of the sofa, her brow furrowed. "Mark, we need to talk about Emily. She's been so withdrawn, and you're not yourself. What's going on?" I hesitated. The bunker, the calendar, the tiny clothes. I couldn't tell her. "Not yet. It's just I'm worried about her too. She's getting older, you know. New school year, new friends. It's a lot for a kid." She eyed me, unconvinced. "It's more than that, Mark. You're barely sleeping. You jump at every little noise." "I'm just stressed," I said, forcing a smile. She didn't seem to believe me. The next few days were a blur of heightened anxiety. Every time Emily walked to school, I'd watch her from the window, my stomach in knots. She'd swing her backpack, her small legs pumping, and I'd feel this irrational urge to run after her, to pull her back inside. Her usual cheerful chatter on the walk home had been replaced by long silences. She'd just walk, her eyes fixed on the pavement, a strange, almost vacant expression on her face. One afternoon, as she was walking home, I saw her stop at the end of our street just before she'd turn onto our block. She stood there for a long moment, perfectly still, looking down the street towards our house, but not directly. It was like she was looking through it or past it. Then she slowly turned and continued walking. I decided to go down to the bunker again. I told myself it was just to confirm my sanity, to prove that it was all in my head. I took a stronger flashlight this time and a small crowbar, just in case. The air in the bunker was even colder and the sweet, cloying smell was stronger. I shone the beam on the calendar. The X for yesterday, the 14th, was still there. And today, the 15th, was already marked with a new, bold X. My hands trembled as I traced the lines of the XS. They were all identical, perfectly drawn. I started going through the canned goods again, looking for any clues. Dates, manufacturers, anything. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I picked up one of the children's jumpers. It was soft, a pale blue with a little embroidered dinosaur. I held it up. It was exactly the right size for Emily. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Then I noticed something I'd missed before. Tucked away at the back of one of the shelves, behind a stack of cans, was a small wooden toy box. It was unpainted, old. I pulled it out. Inside, nestled amongst a few small, smooth stones, was a child's drawing. It was a crude drawing done in crayon. A stick figure family standing in front of a house. But the sky was a deep, oppressive black, and the sun was a jagged, angry red, and there were figures. Small, shadowy figures lurking at the edge of the drawing, their outlines smudged and indistinct. And below the family, scrawled in shaky, childish handwriting, were the words, "They watch." I dropped the drawing as if it had burned me. My breath hitched in my throat. This wasn't just about Emily. This was something else, entirely. I felt a primal fear, the kind that seizes you and makes your muscles lock up. I raced back up the ladder, my heart hammering against my ribs. I slammed the hatch shut and then, with a desperate surge of adrenaline, I used the crowbar to pry at the edges, jamming it between the metal and the earth, trying to secure it to make it impossible to open. It wouldn't budge much, but it felt like something, a futile gesture against an unseen force. That night, Emily woke up screaming. Sarah and I rushed into her room. She was sobbing, her small body racked with tremors. "Mommy, Daddy, the shadows, they're coming." "SHHH, honey, it's okay," Sarah whispered, pulling her into a tight hug. "It was just a dream." But Emily kept crying, her eyes wide with terror, staring into the dark corners of her room. "No, they're watching me from the window, from the closet. They're the ones with the excess." My blood turned to ice. The excess. On the calendar. The ticked excess. The next few days were a descent into sheer pandemonium. Emily refused to go to school. She wouldn't leave her room for more than a few minutes. She'd whimper and cower, pointing at empty spaces, whispering about the watchers and their marks. Sarah, bless her, was trying her best to be rational, talking about night terrors, childhood fears. But even she was starting to look strained, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion and a dawning unease. I spent hours outside, staring at the spot where the hatch was, just waiting. Waiting for what? I didn't know. For someone to emerge. For a sign. The ordinary suburban street with its manicured lawns and barking dogs suddenly felt like a thin veneer over something ancient and terrible. One afternoon, I was sitting in my home office, trying to focus on work, trying to pretend everything was normal. The drone of the lawnmower from a neighbor's house was a strangely comforting sound. Then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic scratching. It was coming from outside, from the back of the house. I crept to the window, my heart pounding. The scratching was louder now, more insistent. It was coming from the ground near where the oak tree had been. I peered through the blinds, nothing. Just the grass, the fence, the fallen leaves. Then it moved. A small section of dirt a few feet away from the hatch seemed to ripple, as if something was pushing upwards from beneath. Slowly, painstakingly, a small pile of dirt began to accumulate, forming a miniature mound. And on top of that mound, pressed into the damp earth, was a single small plastic toy. A little red car. It was identical to the one Emily had lost weeks ago. The one she'd been heartbroken over, convinced it had fallen down a drain. I stared at it, my mind reeling. How could it be there? And the scratching, it was like something was trying to dig its way out, or in. I don't know what I did next. I think I stumbled out of the office, mumbling something to Sarah, who looked at me with that same worried expression. I grabbed a shovel from the garage and ran out to the backyard. I dug, not at the hatch, but at the place where the dirt had rippled, where the toy car lay. The ground was loose, as if it had been recently disturbed. After a few minutes of frantic digging, my shovel struck something hard. Metal, it wasn't the hatch. This was smaller, a different shape. I cleared away the dirt, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the shovel. It was a small metal box, like a strong box. It was heavy and secured with a padlock that looked ancient. I remember the sound of Emily's voice, faint but clear, calling from the back door. "Daddy, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. I just kept digging, a frantic, desperate energy coursing through me. I needed to know. I needed to understand. I dragged the box into the house, Sarah watching me with wide, frightened eyes. The padlock was rusted solid. I smashed it open with the back of the shovel. Inside there was only one thing, a small, folded piece of paper. It was heavy, textured like parchment. I unfolded it. It was a drawing. It was a grid of small squares, and in some of the squares there were symbols, circles, and in others excess. The excess were precisely drawn, identical to the ones on the calendar in the bunker. And then in a corner of the grid, scrawled in that same shaky, childish handwriting, were the words, "The game is almost over, one more day." I looked up, my eyes darting to the clock on the wall. It was October 15th. The X on, the calendar in the bunker. The date marked, then I heard it. A faint, high-pitched giggle coming from Emily's room. I raced to her door. Sarah was already there, her face a mask of horror. Emily was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide and unblinking. She wasn't looking at us. She was looking at the window, and on the pane of the window, etched as if by tiny fingernails, were the excess. Circles and excess. Then she looked at me. And her smile, it wasn't Emily's smile. It was too wide, too knowing. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice a reedy echo of our daughter's. "It's time to play." And from outside, from the direction of the